Hello, everybody, and welcome to the 42 Rugby Weekly. Gavan Casey here, and we are joined, as always, by Murray Kinsella and Bernard Jackman. We're going to hear from Murray in a moment about the news story he broke last night of Jason Jenkins' impending move from Munster to Leinster. Got a lot of you talking on Twitter and so on, so looking forward to getting stuck into that. We're going to chat about the Ireland squad for the Six Nations as well, naturally enough, and look at the provinces in Europe. But firstly, the whole rugby world was rocked yesterday by the terrible news emerging from France of the death of out half Jordan Michallet, who played with Rouen in the French prodigious and was absolutely instrumental, actually, in hauling them up from the fédéral divisions. And Jordan was just 29. His death has not been treated as suspicious in France. And firstly, Bernard, if we could offer condolences to yourself on behalf of Murray and I, because you actually knew him. You coached him in Grenoble, and I was wondering, would you mind telling us a little bit about Jordan?
Yeah, Jordan had everything, to be honest. So I was lucky enough. He came through from Grenoble, family from Grenoble area, was in our underage system, was in our espoirs, and I was part of a staff that gave him his first pro contract. And to be honest, if you had said, how high will this guy go? You wouldn't have been overly ambitious to say he could play for France. He was just so talented. He had everything. Great looking fella, great personality, unbelievably easygoing. And it was, I met his parents today. He signed his contract. Great people. And in fairness, he's had a tough career, even though he's been a professional rugby player, in that he's bounced around. I mean, he wasn't able to stay at his boyhood club, which is Grenoble. Then he went to Bourgoin, which wouldn't be far up the road, but Bourgoin had financial troubles. They were down in Fédéral 1. Then he went to Strasbourg. Then he went to Rouen, who were, as you said, were Fédéral 1, but he played a big role in getting them back up. And he actually only last month signed a new 3-year contract. And Rouen are a very ambitious club. In Normandy, have a decent benefactor. The FFR want and the league want to grow rugby in the north of France. So it felt probably for me, keeping an eye on his career, that he just found his spot and I kind of knew where he was going for the next 3 years. And his wife is pregnant, and just everything seemed to be going well for him. And yeah, it's tragic. It's so sad, to be honest. And as I say, if there was one person that I coached that I felt mightn't struggle for mental health, and this is very naive of me to even think that, but he was the guy who just seemed so comfortable in his own skin, so chilled, so relaxed, and it's shocked me. It shocked everybody who's played with him, and I'm not like Mike Prendergast coached him, Dennis Coulson, James Hart played with him, Shane O'Leary plays with him now. So there's lots of Irish people that have got to know him, and I'm sure many more. But just an absolute gent, and the thing that I thought about when thinking about this over the last couple of days is, and it's something I heard Paul McGinley say, is that we should, he tells his son all the time, look, I'm your first call. You know what I mean? No matter what happens, I'm your first call. And it's something I've tried to do with Ben and Ava, my kids and stuff. And it's something that we should maybe all say to people, to let them know how you're there for them, because, the idea that he's going through that time and no one knows about it, and didn't feel he had maybe an out or someone to talk to, is obviously an issue. And for me, I would say I'm not preaching to anybody, but for me personally, my take on it is to make sure people know that I'm their first call. If I'm close to them, or they feel they can trust me, or that no issue is too big, because there's not. And that's the only thing. It's not the only thing. It's the main thing I'm taking from this is that, and I even said to the Bective group, who I coach, is that it's so important that we look after each other, and it feels like it's there's that possibility of sharing issues, because this young man had the world at his feet, and he had lots of things to do and achieve off the field as well. But unfortunately now that opportunity is gone.
For sure, yeah, it's unbelievably sad. And just if I could add one thing, I guess there are also people out there who do have a first call and know that, and it might not be enough, so it is important to stress that sometimes it's even more complex than being able to talk to somebody. We will include for sure some phone numbers that you can call if you are struggling at home, and if you don't necessarily want to speak about it to a family member or to a friend or to somebody who might be your first call otherwise. And to the people you mentioned as well, Bernard, who did work with Jordan in Grenoble, I know a couple of them do listen to the pod. We're thinking of you as well, and naturally his family and friends back home. Murray.
Yeah, and it's good. Sorry, just
night,
last thing on that. Sorry, just.
Yep.
I think it's. I spoke to Shane O'Leary this morning. Rouen are playing tomorrow night. They're playing Carcassonne in tribute to Jordan. All the revenue from the game is going to go to his family to help support them. And I just thought that was obviously a very difficult thing to do, but hopefully he gets his partner and gets a decent financial aid to help her on her journey to rebuild their life.
Yeah, that should be a fitting send off for him. Very difficult to seg out of that. I don't know how to do it other than just to keep talking. And Murray, last night you were busy. You were off yesterday actually, but you wound up, I think, covering a presser and breaking some transfer news. So tell us about your thoughts on this impending move for Jason Jenkins from Munster to Leinster. Like, if you recall the general tone of discourse around his move to Munster, 18 months ago now, in ways it was quite critical of Munster. We spoke about it on this pod in a lot of detail. You guys felt it wasn't the right move for them, in the sense that not only would it potentially inhibit the progression of people like Thomas Ahern, who might be playing in his position, and at that time he was going to be kind of a second row, back row hybrid, we thought, maybe actually more so a back row, where Munster have even more young guns coming through. Does that same problem exist at Leinster to your mind, or is it a different situation?
Yeah, it is a slightly different situation. It's a very interesting one. When I heard this, I initially thought someone was having me on kind of with it, because it was kind of unimaginable, really, this kind of transfer. And you don't often see players go from Munster straight up to Leinster. I suppose, as we've spoken about in this pod before, we knew that Leinster had been given approval to go out and sign an NIQ, non-Irish qualified lock. They'd identified this area of their game based on the defeats to Saracens and La Rochelle in Europe. They felt like they'd been physically bettered or second best in those games, and they felt that a big, heavy, powerful, mean, tight head lock would benefit them and make them a better team when it comes to those big occasions. My sense had been that, maybe naively, that meant they were going to go out and sign a proven world-class second row with a winner's CV, with a real track record behind them. Obviously that profile probably isn't out there, and in that sense I see it as a bit of a strange signing, because Jenkins is 26, and listen, he could become that world-class lock. I don't think he is that yet. He hasn't started a game since November 2020, I think it is, due to the pandemic and all that, of course, but he's had a few injury issues in Munster, so we haven't had much recent evidence. When he came through in Blue Bulls, absolutely he was a very promising lock. He looked really good there, and has played in Japan a bit and got his Springboks cap in 2018 it was, but I just don't see him fitting that bill that I had presumed that Leinster were going out to sign. The other part of this is that it's such a shame that Jack Dunn now, it looks like, will be leaving for Exeter. That's, neither of these moves are officially confirmed yet, but this is the talk that we're hearing, and he's the guy who you had hoped in Leinster would probably fit that bill of that bigger work rate lock, who does a lot of the dirty work and unseen stuff, for want of a better phrase. He'd put on a lot of size in the last couple of years. He obviously had a long injury spell and has come back from that and had the frustration of, it was COVID in Barbarians camp when he got called up there. But prior to that injury, I thought he was showing nice glimpses of what he could become and be that big destructive lock for Leinster. And they obviously prided themselves massively on producing their own players, but clearly the coaches don't believe that he was ready to fit that bill, and that's why they had to go out and look for a signing. As we discussed with the Michael Alatoa transfer, like, Leinster have earned themselves a lot of credit in this area. Even look at the latest Ireland squad. The predominant share of it are guys who've come through Leinster pipeline to play for Leinster, or come through Leinster schools club system and gone to play elsewhere even. So they are obviously producing a lot of players. granted, the population base is much bigger, and we've spoken about that before, but they've credit in the bank. I just don't think that this is exactly the signing that I was imagining for this slot. I could see why they'd been granted permission to go and get that NIQ second row, but for me, it's a shame, as I mentioned, with Jack Dunn. And while I think Jenkins could be a good player, haven't really seen him, I suppose, consistently perform to that level of saying, yeah, he's definitely going to make Leinster take that next step and be the very best in Europe.
Yeah, Jenkins' reputation has almost been enhanced in his absence, Bernard, because he's often cited as, or more recently he has been cited as a player that Johan van Graan would have loved to have had in his tight five, and they're lacking dynamism partially because he hasn't been there, and yet we just haven't really seen him enough for Munster to establish if that is fact yet. But from your point of view, looking at, say, Jack Dunn, looking at, it's Charlie Ryan, isn't it, from the academy, who potentially could be going to Exeter as well, Murray. There are a couple of more guys that will be naturally placed down the pecking order if Jenkins does come in. Ryan Baird as well could interfere with his playing time. Like, I'm just trying to apply the same parameters to the discussion as we had when Munster signed him, because a lot of Munster fans actually are frothing at the mouth a little bit that it won't be discussed in the same way. As I say, I actually do think it's slightly different. I think the conversation is a little bit different in that when Jenkins signed for Munster, it wasn't just that they were signing, it doesn't matter where he's from, but a South African lock. It's the fact that that seemed to be the answer to their problems way more often than it is Leinster, right? So from Leinster's point of view, Birch, like, is it a more palatable signing to your mind, and does it make sense?
Yeah, it's more palatable. I would have preferred for them to go and get a world-class, proven world-class, guy who could influence the dressing room when, I know there's less clashes, but just someone who's going to give you that presence on and off the field, which, we all hope for Mullen when given Ulster. I don't think he has the game changing ability of a Snyman or Lou Diager or a year.The, to be honest. I think he's a lock. Like, let's be honest. The reason a lot of people were, I certainly was frustrated, was they were selling him as CJ Stander's replacement when he signed for Munster. He is coming to Leinster as a tight head lock. Now, I could see him being on the bench for big games in Europe, like Alatoa. Like, that's if Ryan Baird, comes through. And Leinster, there might be certain games where he's massively important, but probably, to be honest, when you look at the rest of the profile of the Leinster forwards, they're not as reliant on one guy to give them power. For example, if Matfield said that Johan said, he can't play the power game because he doesn't have Snyman or Jenkins. Well, that's because, if you look at on the balance of the other 8 or the other 6, there's not that amount of power. Whereas Leinster are very lucky to have Porter, Kelleher, Furlong, Doris, etc., etc. So I could see him being important for Leinster. Have they got credit in the bank because of the internationals they're producing? Yeah. Is it frustrating if that's why Jack Dunn is leaving? If that's the case, yeah, for sure. But I do think that, and that's why I do think that Stuart Lancaster, Leo Cullen, they need to be winning European trophies. That's their job, along with blooding players and giving them a good environment for Team Ireland. So I think they should be allowed to sign it. Like, I actually didn't have an issue with Munster signing it, except I was frustrated and worried that it would stop Tom Ahern's development, for example. Right? I think Leinster will still manage to bring through the young locks like Brian Deeney, etc., and give them game time. But when it comes to the crunch, La Rochelle away, Toulouse at home, having Jenkins in your match day 23 will make them stronger, because he's proven at that level. Whereas obviously some of the younger fellas still have to have a little bit of go. Even Jack Dunn has development ahead of him to prove he's at that level. So it's strange though. This NIQ moving from Leinster to Munster. I haven't really processed it, to be honest. I was a bit taken back when Murray released it last night, and I'm still trying to work out whether it's right or wrong. But I can see that Leinster, obviously, because that was the thing, I thought Leinster were ignoring the fact that they needed that profile and were just kicking on doing the same thing. But obviously they have felt that they got permission for it. And as well, let's be honest, bar Lou Diager, Chris Fooey, there's not many of that profile lock on the table at the moment because of the World Cup cycle. So their choices are limited. And is he the best of the rest? Yeah, potentially. We just haven't seen it because he's been so injury prone.
One of the other things to add quickly, Gav, is, and I hope it doesn't come across that I was leading that tone that you mentioned earlier on last time around, having a go at Jason Jenkins. Like, I apologise if that feels like the case, if he does listen to our pod. But I suppose the issue was, as Birch mentioned, it was bigger, I suppose, with Munster. We did say at the time he's a good player, and I actually still think that if he gets fit, he can have a big impact for Munster. Like, we've spoken about their tight five probably not having the dynamism. Clearly, Johan van Graan feels that's the case, as Victor Matfield reported on their private conversation. And I still think he could have an impact. I felt it was a very short-term signing, obviously a one-year deal, and could affect others' development. It is interesting also that the RFU have given Leinster now permission to go and sign this type of lock, having given Munster permission after they'd signed RG Snyman. Obviously, he was a different profile, of course. He's a second row. He's a big unit. Obviously, Jean Klein came in from South Africa initially, has qualified to play for Ireland, but he's had that kind of tight head lock role. In Connacht, Quinn Rue left and they got permission to sign Leva Fifita. In Ulster, they've signed Sam Carter. So clearly there's a deficiency that the RFU are acknowledging here as well. And like, maybe that's just physical. Is it, Birch? I don't know. France and South Africa obviously seem to produce a lot of these big, heavy locks, and maybe the Irish physical profile has that weakness, I suppose.
Yeah, and Jack Dunn is someone who looks like he actually has it. But look, I wouldn't, if he goes to Exeter and plays a lot, it wouldn't be a bad thing for his career, to be honest. And he's still Irish qualified. So I think all the provinces need to be able at certain times make decisions that they feel is going to help them achieve their goal. And it's David Nucifor's job to micromanage that and make sure Team Ireland also has the right pathways, and that's not, no one's being blocked to a certain extent. So I can look. It is important. It's the position that everybody wants at the moment. Those tight head locks, and power and size and physicality is a prerequisite to it. So at what is he, 25, 26? He's at the right age profile. Potentially, this has been his block where all the rehab is going to make him robust. So let's see how it unfolds.
Just before we do move on from it, Birch, sticking with yourself, say if it isn't as clear-cut as being the case that Leinster determined Jack Dunn isn't the guy, or isn't the solution to that problem if they see it as one, and maybe he has just had his head turned a little bit by the prospect of possibly playing more for Exeter, developing his career maybe a little bit more quickly, actually, because of game time, as we say over there, and with Charlie Ryan potentially following him to Exeter, is it a problem for Leinster, or a potential problem, I guess, that they haven't had to confront in recent years? We've always lauded their ability to keep the guy third, fourth in the depth chart happy and actually give them enough game time, generally speaking, in what was the Pro 14. Whereas now, maybe those opportunities are a little bit more scarce to begin with. And if a couple of guys do leave and it looks like they're doing well, could it become a pattern, I suppose, is what I'm asking.
Yeah, and it was always the question I think we all posed when we saw the reformatted URC and less clashes, which Leinster, in fairness, Leinster did a great job of being able to blood more players, and the reason they were able to do that was obviously they've got good strength and depth, but plus they were losing more players. So guys were very much feeling part of those URC or Pro 14 or trophies because they played 5, 6, 7 games, and at 21, 22, you feel that's right because you're getting a good mix of good coaching, good S&C, a little bit of game time to test yourself, very good training levels to test yourself against the starting internationals, etc. So, but maybe now it's going to be a challenge for them, and it just takes a couple to go away. Ironically, it's been guys who haven't made the academy, so Keane Prendergast, Will Hickey, etc., getting game time elsewhere, which potentially might, I suppose, get inside the heads of some of the youngsters. Lucas Bertie, is it worth their while staying around, in that 18-19 period? Should they cut their losses and go and test themselves somewhere else where potentially they'll play Champions Cup a little bit younger or have a contract, which will obviously give them more security, etc. And then if they start to lose some of the squad players and they go and do well, I think that's going to be an issue. I think Prendergast will probably do as much harm. His story will probably do as much harm, or not harm, but will get inside the heads of his counterparts in Leinster who stayed and now are outside. So we saw Will Connors, we play for Ireland, even though he wasn't necessarily first choice for Leinster. I know Prendergast's only in as a development player, but certainly if you were a backup for Leinster and only playing a little bit now, and you see someone else who you think you were ahead of or are ahead of or have more experience of starting to get regular game time, really enjoying his rugby, getting a taste of the Irish squad, that may factor in. And in fairness, Joe was very happy for guys to stay in Leinster and not maybe be first choice and get international appearances. Maybe now, because the 4 provinces are playing quite well, maybe it's going to be harder, even though Craig Casey, Conor Murray, you can still do it. Dan Sheehan, Kelleher, you can still get into the Irish squad, but certainly in positions that are very competitive, like back row and maybe props, maybe you'll have to move province to really be able to stake your claim.
The other thing, just to flag briefly, Gav, we wrote in one of our members' newsletters recently, is that Leinster are going to face more and more threats to their player pipeline as well. Just recently, actually, I heard that a player who's currently in school was actually offered a contract by a club in England. Like, he hasn't even come out of school into the Leinster system formally, I suppose, just yet. And now there's an English club interested, and obviously one of the biggest prospects. So, like, that might happen more as well, given the quality of that pipeline we mentioned before. So they face all sorts of threats for their players.
Bert, who is it? You're probably brokering that deal, are you?
No, I'm not broken any deal.
I'm really joking.
No, but in fairness, no, I don't know. I have heard the name, but I do think it makes sense. I think once they get into that sub-academy and that what I call purgatory, where you're there for 2 years, it's probably harder to get them out because they feel committed. So if I was an English or French club, I'd be looking to get them out of school, because then you have the best chance of getting the best. Because I think most kids at 20 will, if having spent 2 years in a sub-academy, will probably go for Leinster if they get offered that academy contract, because maybe they're deep in their studies in UCD or Trinity or whatever, or DIT, and they want to finish that, and also they want to prove themselves. So I can see why it makes sense, and that's the problem when the likes of Will Hickey and Bertie moving shows then maybe that they are potentially able to convince them to leave, and that hasn't been the case for years. Likewise, when top 14 clubs were given the CV of an Irish international or a starter for a province, they started to lose real belief that they would come. And I've said this before, if you get a South African CV or an Islander CV or Super Rugby player, you pretty much know if you meet what they want, they'll sign for you tomorrow. Whereas historically with Irish players, the agents and the players were potentially using that as just a way to try and get more money from a province. And then, then obviously that actually stops clubs even chasing them for a while. And but definitely if French and English clubs think they can get schoolboys out of Ireland, and they start to see a few deals happening, they'll be more tempted to look here.
Let's talk about that Ireland squad then. Murray, question here from Caelan, our famed The 42 member. It's been a while actually since we had one of Caelan's questions. He says, do the lads think this Ireland squad is in a good place? Parking the brilliant November and looking at it solely from a depth and form viewpoint, would they be happy with the squad that is named, or would they make any significant changes? And it felt like Murray yesterday that upon the squad announcement, while there were loads of talking points as there tend to be, it was the least controversial squad that I've seen named in a long time. I don't even know if I saw anybody especially pissed off, which felt like a sea change.
That's strange, but very, very welcome. Yeah, it wasn't controversial really in any way, and the initial absence of, say, someone like James Lowe quickly made sense with an injury, and the other players who've dropped out after November likewise. Just firstly, I think it is a very exciting squad. I don't think you can completely park November. That's their most recent international form. And yes, it's been heavily disrupted, and certainly the French and English leagues in particular have rolled on a lot more smoothly over recent months. So there's slight concerns there. But guys like Johnny Sexton have quickly got up to speed before. We know that. We know that he hasn't often played a lot of rugby coming into Six Nations and has still been able to deliver really impressively for Ireland. So I think there's a nice balance to this squad. I think there's a good blend of experience with some of the youth players who've kind of broken through in the last couple of years under Andy Farrell, some fresher faces again, obviously with Hansen and Lowry coming into the squad, but to a degree, as expected, a very settled squad. I suppose the areas of more concern are similar again. We might get into them, but I think it is a positive squad naming. There's a lot of guys who've been playing excellent rugby, whether it was in November at international level most recently or with their provinces, the likes of Ty Byrne, for example, who's just gone to another level again in his game. And you've, centres stacked with depth. You have a back three with loads of exciting players. The back row is the same again, but there's real quality there as well. So I don't think so. I think Kieran Marmion, for me, is probably the one that stands out as the most unlucky to miss out. He's been excellent for Connacht, but not too many complaints there.
Birch, let's go through a couple of the specifics then. Just begin with, because you touched upon it a moment ago, to the unacquainted, what does it mean that Cian Prendergast is a development player? And how does that work in practical terms when he's the only development player? Like, how will it be different for him than the other 36 or 37?
Yeah, and sometimes it means you set their expectations around game time, and in some cases it means you're only you're going to be sent back to your province to play. Now we know this group are all going to Portugal on Thursday, so none of them are going back to their provinces. So he's going to get a cracking shot at it. And I just think it's recognition of a young player's what he's done, or sometimes it can be kind of before they've actually done it. So Tom O'Toole a couple of years ago was a development player before we'd really seen how high he can go, or him doing it at European level. Whereas it's a sign that I think Faz or Joe or whoever is out there listening to the provincial coaches. They've got an eye on the on what's underneath. Someone who's got high potential but maybe very low minutes, and it's an opportunity to bring them in and probably keep the fans, the pundits, from going, oh geez, well, like, how is he in ahead of X? You know what I mean? So it just gives the coach that out that Cian Prendergast is maybe ahead of Jack O'Donoghue in terms of the here and now, but certainly he's the one that they want to look at for the future. So that's where it is. Look, can he play in the Six Nations? Of course he can. He'll be in the squad. He'll know the line of calls. He'll know everything. But I just think it sets that level of expectation, and maybe also, gives others in that position the belief and hope that he hasn't moved completely ahead of them. It's a mix of what he's doing and what he can do in the future.
Murray, Mac Hansen, Mike Lowry, two very exciting inclusions. A couple of names that fans from all over the country, I think, would be really interested in seeing. 15 feels like it's almost ring-fenced, just given Hugo Keenan's form. We don't know, like, there could be an opportunity against Italy or whatever, but I suppose what I'm asking is, how much would one anticipate seeing Mike Lowry being involved? And along similar lines, do you see Mac Hansen as an actual contender to play a bit of ball in the spring, or is he almost like a de facto development player in that it'll be his first time involved in that setup?
Yeah, I mean, they're coming from further behind. It was really interesting. I was listening to Wayne Pivac on the Scrum V podcast over in Wales, and he kept mentioning just how important international form is, like, and how that's what they judge players on. So they're coming from way behind, obviously, because they don't have international form. They have no caps, and the guys who are in that back three kind of bracket with them have a lot of credit in the bank. Obviously James Lowe is dropping out, but as you said, Keenan's a nailed on starter at 15. Conway was excellent when he played in those 2 November tests, and Robert Balakoon, he got a start against Argentina and he's just been brilliant every time he's played. Keith Earl's obviously hugely experienced, and Jordan Larmour overcoming a dead leg. I would have them ahead of the 2 new guys in the pecking order, of course. The Italy game in round 3 is at home. It feels like as good an opportunity as ever to experiment, is the wrong word, but to slightly shake things up. And unfortunately, we know that hasn't always been the case, particularly if a team gets on a roll in the first couple of games. The coaches genuinely justify it as we need to keep that momentum going, particularly with a week off either side of the Italy game. So it might not be the case, but I personally think it is a fine opportunity for the two guys you mentioned, potentially one of them getting involved, someone like James Hume to get a start with his excellent form. But in the back three, I have to say, I think Keenan, Conway, Earls and Balogun are the four guys who will kind of be the front runners there. James Lowe dropping out changes that up because he's an out and out left wing, whereas Conway's been playing on the right. He played for Ireland on the left against USA in the summer, so could potentially switch across. Earls obviously plays on the left wing for Munster at the moment and has lots of experience there, so that might give space for Balogun to slot in on the right. That's the way I'd be leaning towards it, I suppose, with Keenan, Conway, Balogun potentially starting. But it's brilliant for Hansen and Lowry to get that acknowledgement as well and get a chance to expose themselves to that consistent level of training now across the 7 or 8 weeks of the championship. They all talk about how you have to go to a different level. You get into Ireland camp, and hopefully that's followed up by a couple of minutes on the pitch.
Looking at 10, Birch, a lot of people probably got their wish. It sounds cruel, but that Harry Byrne isn't involved, and it's nothing personal against him. I think it's more so that he naturally was taking up a space that could be occupied by somebody who was playing more regularly and playing better at the moment in Jack Carty. Joey Carberry is probably a surprise inclusion to a lot of people. I personally thought he would have been out a little bit longer. Maybe he can get involved around the middle to late stages of the tournament. What are your thoughts on out half?
Yeah, look, I'm delighted to see Jack in. I think he's been consistent. He's leading Connacht from the front. He's shown a wide variety of skills, and I think he is the form backup 10. And this is Six Nations. We always hear that there's very little room for experimentation, bar maybe the Italy game. November's the time to try things out. So I like the fact that Faz has gone full circle on this, and he had Harry in November because obviously he's a player that they want to see what he can do. They like his ability. Unfortunately for Harry, he just hasn't had game time for a variety of different reasons since, so he hasn't really had a chance to push forward his case. So and I think once players can kind of see logic behind things and see they are rewarded over the course of the medium to long term for being in form, that they can accept that and understand it. So I think if that happens, Johnny Sexton, you'd feel a lot more comfortable. I'd certainly feel comfortable with Jack Carty playing against Wales, given the level of form and confidence he's shown. And if he feels that Joey, which obviously medical, the medics will have a big say in every decision that this squad is based around. That if Joey's going to be back for the latter part of the Six Nations, well then let him come in, do his rehab there, be part of everything. And if we need him later on in the tournament, he's there. So I can see the logic of having him in, even though it was a bit of a surprise. I was probably thinking, that he'd miss out of the initial squad, and if he got fit, they might add him to it later on. But they've obviously decided that they're covered with Johnny and Jack, and maybe Connor as a de facto 10. Now he's on a central contract, and get some more use out of him. But they obviously feel they're covered.
Murray, just on the replacement out half berth, given that Carberry is now injured, hasn't been tearing up any trees necessarily, partially because he was on his way back from another more long-term injury. Like, if you were Billy Burns, would you feel a little bit slighted? I don't know, maybe even Ross Byrne did well at the weekend. We have good options there, don't get me wrong, but just that so much faith is being shown in a guy whose form hasn't been there in Carberry and who is now actually unable to play ball.
I thought his form was picking up before this injury. Even in November, there was a little hints of it. With Munster, I think there have been. Even that Wasps game, albeit against weak opposition, he had a really influential role in it. And for me, he was moving in the right direction. I could kind of visibly see some of his confidence returning, and he had been honest about that dropping off when he was out for so long. And clearly they want to keep that progression going. I think the fact that Jack Carty is playing such good rugby gives him real assurance about that backup slot to Sexton, and gives Carberry a little bit more time to get fully fit again. Like, on form, Carty deserves to be in Ireland's matchday squad. He's playing brilliant rugby consistently across the course of the season, and I agree with Birch, like, you'd fully back him to fit in really well actually to how Ireland are trying to play, with his combination of tactical kicking, which is so important at test level, and also his ability to make decisions at the line, which we've spoken about. So I actually think it kind of makes sense. I was, of course, surprised to see Carberry there. I presumed again that they'd do the same as what Birch mentioned, but it makes a little bit more sense in hindsight. I'm also fascinated to see if Carberry pops up at fullback again for Ireland, which we saw in November, wasn't it? Or was it last summer? Towards the end of one of the games with Harry Byrne. Because that's an option for them going forward. It gives you great flexibility in your matchday squad as well, obviously. And then Larry there as well can play 10 when you're in matchday or training scenarios with 15 on 15. He's got the skill set to cover that. So yeah, they look in decent nick there with Burns and Byrne. Yeah, of course they're going to be disappointed. You kind of wonder, has Andy Farrell had a look at them and said, they're not my guys to move forward with? Clearly he's a fan of Byrne, and it would be no shock to see him back in the mix again in the future and longer term.
I think Kieran Treadwell is a bit of an interesting inclusion, if only because it speaks to what you were saying, Bernard, about guys seeing that form will still be rewarded, even if he hasn't necessarily been a figure that there has been enormous clamour for his inclusion in recent years. And it's been, I think, about 4 years since he actually played for Ireland. But almost slowly but surely, maybe a little bit under the radar, probably not to Ulster fans, I'll probably get a few emails about this, but he's been really impressive and has played his way into contention. Talk to us a little bit about what you've seen from him this season that has actually allowed him to make that step to getting back into international contention.
Yeah, he has been impressive, and obviously the weekend he was very strong against Northampton, as was Ross Maloney, to be honest, who was in the squad last summer and didn't get a cap. But I think obviously Delan deciding to go to La Rochelle has opened up another slot there. And actually, I think, to be honest, and this isn't anything against Kieran Treadwell or Ross Maloney, but I think it's probably the area that we're maybe a little bit light behind. Obviously, look, Tyburn can play second row, but is he going to be effective at test level as a second row? I'm not sure. James Ryan has some injury problems. Hendo's struggling with injury. So they're your three guaranteed. If they play for you on Saturday against England, you're not worried about them. But below that, there's a little bit of a gap at the moment, or they're looking to find who's next to step up. And Thornbury, in fairness, had shown glimpses, but he's had a very bad run with injuries. But I think he's someone you should keep an eye on. Ahern, he's getting game time at last. He's putting his hand up, so he could have been maybe in there as a development player. But it is great to see someone like Treadwell, who's a very good ball carrier, to be fair. Quite athletic, mobile, abrasive, and in form. So yeah, full credit to Farrell for bringing him in. But it's the area when I looked at that squad where I'm not as sure we have massive proven depth lower down at number 5, 6, 7. But yeah, it's great to see someone like Treadwell get in.
And that can be kind of quickly exposed just depending on bad luck with a couple of injuries at a World Cup or whatever. Ryan Baird is the number 4 lock now, and certainly is a freakish athlete, so much potential there. But I wonder, do they still see him in that potential bracket rather than a guy who's demanding to be in the matchday squad every single weekend? I suppose there. And then the two prop positions are areas that they'll be looking towards that succession planning as well. Obviously, he really wants Tom O'Toole to push on to the next level with his game and be a real viable backup contender behind Tyke Furr, along with Porter having gone across to Loosehead. Finlay Bealham, we saw his importance to Connacht last weekend after he went off and the scrum, I suppose, fell apart and was a massive point of difference. And then on the Loosehead side, you've got Porter, who can clearly be one of the best Looseheads in the world game and has lots of years ahead of him. And then you've got two guys who are more senior figures, I suppose, in Cian Healy and Dave Kilcoyne, without a really obvious candidate to try and come in and take one of their squad spots. So you're always looking longer term, and while it's a really exciting squad at the moment, the RFU and Ireland will definitely be considering those 3 slots, I think.
Yeah, you partly answered John Malloy's question there on Loosehead. No. I mean, I think John will be reasonably satisfied, I'm sure. But just to throw it through yourself as well, Birch, because you're mentioning that lock may be an area in which we don't have proven depth at the moment. I suppose John is actually casting his eye to the future a little bit. He mentions how, as Murray says, and as everybody knows, Cian Healy probably doesn't have a huge amount of road left to run. John reckons Kilcoyne's form has dipped a little bit this season. I'd probably be a little bit careful with that. Just form can be temporary, to use that old cliche, and Munster's season has been fairly well disrupted. He could be a guy that just takes a while to hit the ground running again. But as John mentions, it is the only position he's looking at and getting a little bit more worried about. He mentions that there are live options even at 9 and 10, but they just don't seem to have that at Loosehead. Is it just a case of playing the waiting game a little bit and hoping that the talent is unearthed in that position, Birch?
Yeah, no, I think we will develop loose heads to replace eventually Keane and Kilcoyne. I wouldn't be overly worried about it. I think, he's 100% right. You know, the age profile of our two backup loose heads, would make you wonder and look at it. But I think both they're obviously both on track to get to the World Cup now, and that's the short to medium term for us. And I'm sure John Fogarty and Paul O'Connell are spending a lot of time trying to find out who's going to be the long term replacements for them. So yeah, I agree with him. It's not as clear cut, but I still think there's guys like Wycherley, for example, who potentially could become a replacement over the next 24 months.
Michael Halpenny, another the 42 member, had a brilliant question about. He was asking you guys who would you start from 11 to 14 across the back line. We're going to expand that out. I gave you a small bit of homework to do. I felt like a dickhead, don't get me wrong, but I did ask you to put together a 23, your personal 23s to play Wales. I hope you did get a chance to do it. Murray, you might start us off. Well, firstly, did you do it?
I did a 15 anyway, I'll give you that. It's pretty straightforward.
Okay.
I think anyone could probably guess. Porter, Keller, Furlong. I'd Byrne and Ryan. I think you can't leave Byrne out at the moment. Doris van der Fleer, Conan. Gibson Park, Sexton. I'd Henshaw and Ringrose in the centre. I like that pairing, but tough to leave out Bundyaki, and James Hume is pushing hard. And I went for Conway, Balakoon, Keenan in the back three. I'll have a think about the bench now while Birch is going.
Yeah, I have the same. I have the same 15. So I'd go Killer on the bench. I'd go Sheehan. I'd go Beelum, to be honest. But obviously, I think O'Toole can pass him out. I'd go Baird, covering lock or back row. I'd go Coombs, and then I would go Casey ahead of Murray. I'd go Jack Carty, and my outside back was who would I go for my outside back? Earls.
Yeah, tough to disagree with that, really. Obviously, I think Peter Manny's playing brilliant rugby and deserves on form to be included in there. He did a good job off the bench when he did that in the autumn, but we definitely need to find out about Gavin Coombs sooner rather than later at this level. It was really unfortunate in November that he had that illness and couldn't feature. And obviously you're going all out to win a title in the Six Nations, but if you can do that while learning a bit more about Coombs with a couple of decent stints off the bench, that'll be massive. Murray's the fascinating one, isn't he, in the squad? And we've been here talking about this before. He's got his new RFU deal, and he's going to battle hard for that starting slot. I'm sure we'll get into it in the next few weeks, but Gibson Park is the man in possession.
Yeah, see me after class, lads. I don't know who was cogging off who, but we'll get to the bottom of it. No, thank you. We'll chat about the provinces in Europe now. Let's start with Ulster, because I saw Birch. No, actually, I think we were just chatting during the week or maybe even after the game. You were saying it was probably the standout performance for you over the weekend. Their victory in Northampton, maybe the most entertaining game involving the provinces. Connacht Leicester is pretty good as well. But what was it that actually appealed to you mostly about Ulster's win?
I just think they had ambition, but then they had a plan and really good understanding of how Northampton defended and how they could exploit that. So it wasn't just throwing the ball around willy-nilly. They got the right people on the ball in the right areas of the field and exploited that Northampton defence, and there was a really nice balance to it. So they probed down the blind side when it was on. They weren't afraid to go hard, off the ruck and go at Northampton, and then they were happy to go out the back. So it's just really good, and they executed as well. I mean, they've got footwork in that back line. It's just a very exciting back line, and it's interesting, could they play that way with Stuart McCluskey in it? And that sounds really harsh, because he's been He's been absolutely brilliant for them, and a lot of their big performances have came when he's played. But certainly there was a nice balance to their back line at the weekend, and I think they're going to get so much confidence from having gone away from home and put in a performance like that. Like, look, I know they conceded a late try, and maybe at the end it looked tight and nervous, but they were quite comfortable. I thought they controlled the game really well, and yeah, it's just amazing that Connacht game in the Aviva where we left going, Jesus, is that where they're at? You know, they haven't been as brilliant as they were on Sunday since then, but they've definitely used that game to get a lot more consistency about them, and I thought it was an outstanding performance.
Says a lot about the standard of our listeners' questions that they're being preempted while you're talking. But James Daniels was in touch as well, and he asks that same question about Ulster being able to play with McCluskey at 12, and he says they played their best attacking rugby in a long time against Northampton, so he's in agreement with yourself there, Birch. I think Stuart Moore played well as a link player and brought their attack together effectively. Do you think that by playing McCluskey, Ulster won't be able to recreate this fluidity? Lowry, Balakoon and Hume are their most dangerous running threats, so is someone like McCluskey going to be able to unlock their abilities in the same way that a distributor like Moore could? Obviously you need gay line and momentum to put the ball wide, but why can't Hume do this? I think it would be an interesting point for the podcast, as in my opinion one of Ulster's problems is the lack of fluidity and cohesion their backline has with McCluskey involved, particularly against the strongest defences. So I'll throw that to yourself, Murray, to pick up on both James and Birch's point.
Yeah, it's interesting. I probably disagree that they lack fluidity with Stuart McCluskey there. I mean, if you think of the Clermont game away, like the combination between McCluskey and Hume was really important and has been all season. I actually think their combination has been probably the best centre pairing in the country this season. They've been absolutely phenomenal together, and I've grown the understanding to the point where McCluskey is often just putting Hume into one-on-one situations where he knows he can do damage. Think of that Leinster game where they won in the RDS, and that lovely little overs line that Hume runs outside Larmer for the opening try, the opening score. It was a brilliant bit of combination between the pair of them. He's obviously a very physical player, Stuart McCluskey, but I think there's a lot of subtlety to his game. I think he's brilliant at going at the line and pulling the pass behind to a second playmaker, a second wave of the attack. He's even developed his kicking game, and I just think he's such a massive figure for Ulster. It is really important to have different ways and different styles of player. I thought that was the best thing about Stuart Moore. Rory Best called it really well in comms, that he wasn't trying to be Stuart McCluskey. He was using his footwork a little bit more. He passed the ball, I think, 6 times, so it wasn't like he was flinging the ball all over the place. Hume passed the ball 6 times as well. And it's great to see that he has that aspect to his game. He certainly does. He's very creative, and himself and Hume combined in a different manner. Even the build up to Balakoon's try, they both had really important darts at the line. I think Moore picks up an inside pass at one stage, and he has all those smarts to his game, and you'd love to see him take off. It's always the case in Irish rugby, isn't it? There's another guy waiting behind, but there's an established figure there, and I just don't think you can look past the importance of McCluskey to Ulster. The physical side of it is just as important as the creative and softer skills, and he gives that side of the game as well. So yeah, I don't think that he restricts Ulster all that greatly, and I think he offers a lot aside from that passing stuff.
Birch, if one of the other 3 provinces, I would say, had the lead over Leicester Tigers that Connacht did and threw it away, we'd probably be pretty scathing. I think fans of other provinces are almost a little bit weary of how Connacht get, to their mind, an easy ride from us. I don't know, is it just that they're generally more of the underdog due to resources, historically probably, than the others? But that felt like just a brilliant performance that they fecked away in the last 20 minutes, and I wonder why it happened, and I wonder how it's fixed.
Yeah, look, I think we all, for other fans who are annoyed or frustrated that the free ride they see Connacht getting, I think as pundits we enjoy how they play, but we also, I certainly take into account the handicap they have in terms of maybe history, heritage, guaranteed to be in, more than likely be in Europe every year, budget, etc. So a lot of players there have come from other provinces or outside of Ireland, and and have a point to prove. Okay, but in general, they're not armed. They're not armed as well as Ulster, Leinster, and Munster in terms of support, finance, etc. So I think we take that into account, and if that's fair or not, I'm not sure, but that's certainly how I see it. And then I said when they're playing attractive rugby and it's exciting, that feeds into it as well. You maybe enjoy it more. I'm not sure, but I think the reason they lost the game, it's very difficult to actually. So from a coaching point of view, you're 28-10 up against Leicester. Leicester, a team who don't really play in their own half. They want to get territory and then build from that. So it's very hard to say play from deep. Even though that's Connacht's strength and they can do that, but they also have a smart kicking game. Connacht aren't afraid to play territory. Jack Carty kicks very well. Marmion kicks well. In particular, Carty in particular puts him in the right areas of the field. So you're 18 points up. Of course, you don't want to get caught overplaying in your own half. And unfortunately, I think they weren't able to win that kick battle. And the reason Leicester use that as one of their tools is because they're very effective at it. They're very accurate and precise and disciplined in their kicking game. So Connacht weren't able to win that kick battle, and then hence they gave up possession in their own half. And then the biggest issue for them was lack of squad depth. Their bench players, and we saw it away in Leicester, their bench players weren't able to come on and have the same level of impact as the guys who left the pitch or the Leicester replacements, and particularly around set piece. Now, I know the try they scored at the end wasn't a set piece try. It was a brilliant try by Leicester, in fairness, and a great pass from Dan Kelly, who obviously was Irish qualified. And, it was a great finish, etc. So Connacht got caught a little bit, but again, if you're Connacht, was it the right thing to do by the game management? Was it the right thing to do by the message from Andy Friend? I think it was, like if they tried to run from their own 22 and got turned over and that led to defeat, you're saying, why aren't Connacht more pragmatic? So it's one of those ones I think they just need to develop that depth in their, particularly for their set piece, to not be able to, I suppose, concede penalties, concede momentum yards like they did late in the game. But again, that comes back to probably budget. And not just budget, you can fix the budget you can overcome the budget deficit by doing what Andy Friend is doing, which is building, a project where people want to be part of, coaching them really well. So, those guys like Prendergast who weren't deemed good enough to make it in Leinster suddenly find their potential and can become better than the guys that someone else picks. So there is ways around it, but it takes time. And I do have massive faith in Andy Friend's ability to get the best out of this Connacht team. But the reality as well, when people are looking at moves, one of the handicaps Connacht have is that at the moment you can't bet your house on it that Connacht will be in the European Cup every year. And players know that European Cup game or sequence of games will have massive bearance or weight when Andy Farrell picks the Six Nations squad. So it's all those things that as an analyst or pundit I try and take into account when I look at them. And yeah, that's probably why we don't judge them the same way as we do the other three. But that's because they're starting from a lower point. For sure, I want to get to the stage where I'd love Connacht to be on a level playing field and we can, call them out or analyse them in the exact same way we do the other three. But I think hopefully fans take into account that it's not a level playing field in Ireland at the moment.
Murray, we've got literally 3 minutes, 2 more games to talk about. Now, to stress to people at home, yourself and Kieran Kennedy did absolutely dive into these games in detail on Monday for the 42 members. It's members.the42.ie if you want to sign up there and get Rugby Weekly Extra, usually with Murray and Owen Toolan every Monday, but Kieran did a stellar job stepping in this week. Leinster against Montpellier. The commentary team on BT Sport of Ryle, Bod and Ben Kaiser were at pains to stress that Leinster weren't putting together a perfect performance. They were quite critical of the handling errors, despite what was a very entertaining performance to my mind. I kind of felt like you don't need to make this point, to be honest. If you're going to have pretty much all of the ball and it's going to be in play for 40 minutes and you're playing like the Harlem Globetrotters, they're going to be handling errors. I thought Leinster did a professional demolition job, made a point of the competition. And I wonder, Murray, with Montpellier, there was almost an emotional reaction from everybody who watched the game that they had kind of disgraced the competition. I just wonder, in retrospect, were people, including ourselves, a little bit harsh in the sense that they were besieged by COVID cases in the build-up, and maybe the criticism of the team they sent over was a little bit unjust? I don't know what you think.
As far as I know, there were other players available and they opted to send a weakened team. So no, not really for me. It just never felt like they took the fixture seriously, and they were in the mix. And indeed may still be for knockouts. So I thought their performance was really shocking, and their effort. But yeah, Leinster absolutely deserve credit. It was interesting. Felipe Contepomi kind of said, "Here, give some credit, lads. We took them to 40 minutes ball and play when they're used to 30 minutes." And some of the attacking play was obviously superb. So just brilliant to see Leinster back in action. Brilliant for Ireland as well. Loads of guys looking sharp. And yeah, hopefully Leinster can get the job sealed now on Saturday and on into the knockouts.
Munster away to Cast. Again, don't have time to actually get into the game in detail. Talk to me about Jack Crowley, Murray, and what you saw from him. Is he a guy that Munster can potentially build around into the future? Is it still a bit too soon to say?
I think he looks really good. I think he's looked really good over the last couple of weeks. He's made mistakes. It's been clear for everyone to see, but he's reacted in the right way. He's physically very game, gets stuck in, as we saw with the tackle and carry stats, but you can see some of the glimpses of vision and footwork and creativity. He just needs a run, doesn't he? And Ben Healy's back now, and he wasn't available last weekend, and Joey Carberry's going to return. So that's the issue for him. We've discussed it before, but I do think he has a really high ceiling, and he has a really good head for the game as well. So you would absolutely love to see him continue to get minutes while also recognising that Ben Healy is on an upward trajectory as well.
Birch, in one word, Ulster against Clermont.
Ulster.
In one word, Leinster away to Bath.
Leinster, bonus point.
In one word, Connacht away to Stade Francais.
Connacht.
Nice. And in one word, Munster at home to Wasps.
Munster.
Thank you very much. Great to see you, gents. We need to let Bernard get back to his actual real life big boy job. Thanks a million to everybody for tuning in at home. As I say, Rugby Weekly Extra on Monday, and we will be back in this regular slot next Thursday. Enjoy all the rugby over the weekend. Have a great weekend. Mind yourselves and take it easy.